Welcome to the Early Career Professionals in Mapping webinar series. The American Geosciences Institute has partnered with the National Cooperative Geologic Mapping Program to highlight the work of early career geoscience professionals, especially as it relates to the use and production of geologic maps. Each webinar will begin with a presentation from an early career geoscience professional, followed by an interview and ending with a live Q&A session. We are happy to introduce today's speaker, Valarie Harrison. Valarie grew up in Tennessee and completed both her bachelor's and master's degrees at the University of Memphis. She is now an environmental scientist with the Tennessee Geological Survey. She is here with us today to share projects in which she is creating geologic maps and collecting data throughout Tennessee.
Hi, my name is Valarie Harrison, and I'm an environmental scientist with the Tennessee Geological Survey. My focus is on mapping the geology of West Tennessee, which includes mapping aquifers, their protective aquicludes, gravel resources, and much more. My work involves collecting data in the field as well as remote sensing data and using various technological tools to analyze these data and synthesize a map. These maps are then used as a reference for community development, geological hazard assessment, and scientific inquiry. In today's talk, I want to take you through all of the types of data that I collect, the way it's analyzed, and show the products and how they are used. But first, I want to talk about why I chose to study geology and some of the perks of studying geology. I grew up in a rural area just outside of Memphis, Tennessee, on land that was once a dairy farm. This access to the outdoors was what sparked my interest in the natural world, as I enjoyed exploring and cataloging the different types of plants and animals that were on the property. This curiosity is what propelled me to study the sciences in college. During my studies, I took an introductory course in geology, and after that, I was hooked. I went on to pursue a major in geology with a minor in biology, followed by a master's in geology, all of these from the University of Memphis. While pursuing my undergraduate degree, I had the opportunity to travel to new and exciting places, explore some of the most beautiful terrain the U.S. has to offer, and all while learning valuable skills. One of my favorite experiences during this time was going to geology field camp in South Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. We spent our time hiking, learning how to make geologic maps, and learning about the geologic history of that region. Though I gained a lot of experience throughout undergrad, during graduate school is where I really honed my skills while working on various projects throughout West Tennessee. Two of these projects I'm going to share with you today. In the first project, I studied the orientation of rock fractures in an area along the Tennessee River and compared that to straight or linear stream segments to see if there was a correlation between rock fractures and stream direction. This involved going out into the field and looking for systematic fractures, or in other words, regular and repeated breaks in the rocks that all point in generally the same direction. Using a Brunton compass, shown in the picture on the left, we gathered lots of information on the orientation and length of fractures, as well as other observations seen in rock outcrop. Next, we used remote sensing imagery of the study area to look for linear stream segments using Geographic Information Systems, or GIS for short. The map on the right highlights those linear segments in red. Once we had all of our information, we were able to plot the data on a map. On the left, you can see all of the field site locations, and on the right, you see the stereo nets that group these fractures into zones. The stereo nets are circular, graph-like illustrations. They are easy to read visual representations that show the fracture or stream directions and allow for easy comparison between data sets. This type of study helps us learn more about the influences on surface and subsurface water flow, which is important in protecting our water sources from pollution. The second project that I'd like to highlight is one where I use geostatistics and coding to create a 3D geological model. The study area was Tipton and Lauderdale counties, which are located north of Memphis, Tennessee, and are within the New Madrid seismic zone. I gathered water well, borehole, and seismic reflection data and wrote code using RStudio to determine the tops of geologic units from the surface to a depth of about 3,000 feet. Here are some of the results from that code that went into the final model. These maps show the elevations of the top of important geological features or units, such as the Memphis Aquifer, its protective aquiclude, gravel resources, as well as the deeper units like the Cretaceous strata. I then used GIS to make the model by creating blocks of the strata and draping the surface geology on top. I made observations such as the thickness of the units, locations where they may be absent, and even introduced known deeper faults into the model to see if the shallower units had been displaced. This model was then used by other researchers to make seismic hazard maps of the counties based on the physical characteristics of each unit. After graduation, I applied to institutions where I could put my skills to use. With my background and knowledge of West Tennessee geology, I was excited to be offered a job working in the Tennessee Geological Survey as a West Tennessee mapper. There are many aspects of geologic mapping, but an important first step is describing and naming units. What do we call these geologic formations? Throughout the centuries-long history of mapping, there have been many generations of geologists, as well as new observations and advancements in technology. What I'm showing here is a result of poor communication. This is a chart showing the different geological formations and the different names used in mapping the same unit across multiple states, a phenomenon we jokingly call the state line fault. For example, the Memphis Sand in Tennessee is broken into two units in Kentucky, the Sparta Sand and the Talahata Formation. One project that I am now a part of is a multi-state collaboration to standardize our naming schema. The end result will facilitate easier communication between state agencies and lessen the confusion when crossing state lines. My main task, however, as an environmental scientist and field mapper, is to collect data and make geological interpretations. Part of this work involves collecting samples, and one way to do that is by digging deep. We have begun a drilling project in West Tennessee so that we can gather samples at greater depths. This involves drilling a hole, pulling out the sediment, gathering samples, and making descriptions. This gives us information about the location of the aquifer, if it is well protected by its aquiclude, if there are any gravel resources, and much more. We are also using this project as an opportunity to collaborate with other scientists who may be interested in gathering data from these boreholes. Researchers will be collecting soil samples to study the near-surface soil biome, and others will be gathering data on the geophysics of the sediment. I really enjoy this work because it gives us a glimpse into the deeper geology that many take for granted, even though it is vitally important to our local communities. Another method used to collect data is by using ground-penetrating radar, shown on the left. It is non-invasive and gives a look at the stratigraphy to a depth of about 15 feet in West Tennessee sediment. I have used GPR to investigate potential faulting, as well as assisted in imaging sand dunes in Arkansas to determine paleo wind direction at the time it was deposited. Additional field data is gathered by simply hiking the study areas and getting descriptions and locations of geologic features. Getting boots on the ground is vital and can lead to new discoveries. Aside from mapping geologic units, some important things to look out for in the field are surface faults, landslides, and liquefaction features that are the result of earthquake activity. I also use remote sensing data gathered by satellite and aircraft to get a big picture view of the study area. Here you see a digital elevation model, or DEM, on the top left. This gives the elevation at a given point. DEMs can be used in many ways, including calculating the slope of the terrain, the direction of the slope, watershed boundaries, and is a powerful visual aid in making interpretations. The other three images show multispectral satellite imagery from which mineral concentrations are mapped. This can help describe the surface geology and may help locate specific geologic units. So what is the final product? Shown here is a geologic quadrangle, which is one way this data can be represented on a map. Once all the data is plotted in GIS and interpreted, I can make a geologic map similar to the one shown here. The colors correspond to geologic units that are on the surface of the landscape. On the right, you see the detailed description of those units. The descriptions can include the mineral content, grain size, organic concentration, unit thickness, fossil content, and any important observations to note about the study area. On the map, geologists will show any faults that were found and the orientation of the strata. In addition to surface geology, these maps may also give a cross-section or vertical slice view of the deeper geology, as shown on the bottom of this slide. If any faults are present, the geologist will likely show what the faults might look like in the subsurface by showing offset of those strata in the cross-section. The maps made by geologists are referenced during community development. They add to scientific knowledge and further inquiries, and are used during geologic hazard assessment. One hazard that we face here in West Tennessee is earthquake activity from the New Madrid seismic zone. This map shows the epicenter locations for earthquake activity in the region, with the yellow stars showing the locations of the 1811-1812 earthquakes. This is an intraplate seismic zone, which simply means that it is a seismically active area that is not located along a tectonic plate boundary. That makes this seismic zone an anomaly since earthquake activity typically occurs along plate boundaries. The earthquakes of 1811-1812 are thought to be up to a magnitude 7.7, and they left their mark on the landscape in many ways. Most notably, the upending of land along the Mississippi River near the Tennessee-Kentucky border, which resulted in the Mississippi River running backwards for several hours, after which the river had to change its course and Reelfoot Lake was formed. First-hand accounts from these events describe massive sand blows, the creation and destruction of lakes in the blink of an eye, and large fissures that opened and closed with the moving seismic waves. They also reveal that these earthquakes were felt as far away as Boston and Washington, D.C., which are close to 900 miles away from these epicenters. This is a simulation made by the United States Geological Survey of a 7.7 magnitude earthquake occurring in roughly the same location as the largest of the 1811-1812 earthquakes. It shows how the seismic waves would travel through the region. The color ramp represents the horizontal velocity magnitude of the seismic waves, with blue being the lowest and red being the highest magnitude. It is a safe bet that if such an earthquake were to occur, the devastation would be widespread. At the Tennessee Geological Survey, part of my job is to prepare for such an event by working with the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, or TEMA, as an emergency services liaison. If a large magnitude earthquake occurs, I'm part of the information gathering team that will go on scouting missions to assess the damage and pinpoint where ground disturbance has occurred. My work as a mapper is made all more important when this is a possibility. The threat of such a devastating earthquake happening again has generated a lot of interest into New Madrid's seismic hazard by researchers across the world. The maps, data, and observations are an important part of this research, and the goal is to make our communities more resilient in the face of catastrophic events. I hope that my presentation gave you a better idea of the ways a geologist gathers data, uses technology, and the value of the map that is made. Whether it's for mineral resources, community development, water resources, hazard assessment, or scientific inquiry, geologic information is vital to humanity. My goal was to try to demonstrate the importance of geology, but also the fulfillment that I get from being a geologist. With so many options on what to study in college, the decision is ever difficult. But my pitch to you is that if you're looking for a career that's rewarding, uses cutting-edge technology, and involves traveling in the outdoors, I think the choice is simple. Study the geosciences.
Valarie, thank you for sharing some of the work that you've done in the past and the work you do now at the Tennessee Geological Survey. Lindsay and I are excited to dive into some of the details of your work and experiences. And you obviously have a lot of different projects that you've worked on. Is it typical for someone at the Tennessee Geological Survey to be involved in multiple projects, or do you take it upon yourself to kind of go and get these other projects that you're involved in?
A little bit of both. So we do have projects that we kind of spearhead as the Tennessee Geologic Survey through our mapping projects, but that's not all we do. We don't just churn out quadrangles. We can collaborate with universities or other institutions who might be looking for someone from the Tennessee Geological Survey to help with other projects. So for instance, I've been working with the University of Memphis for quite a while throughout my undergrad and graduate school. And so I've built a lot of bridges, and I'm continuing to kind of take care of those bridges and collaborate on some of the work that they are doing, as well as some of the work they're coming along with some of the work that we're doing at TGS.
That's amazing. I think it speaks towards, again, you propelling your career forward by keeping those relationships going, having people that you've worked with continue to work with in the current states of your projects too. That's a great relationship to build, and probably great
Definitely.
advice for other people to continue not just making use of people and working on projects in high school or in college, but those relationships are really important going forward.
For sure. Yes.
Awesome. And speaking about relationships, do you typically work with other people at the Tennessee Geological Survey, or is it mostly solo work? Can you speak towards your interactions kind of on an everyday basis?
Yeah, so primarily solo. A lot of stuff that I do is virtual. We have a very small team. We have 4 mappers. And so I'm primarily out there by myself, doing recon work and things of that nature. But if I want to go and do some hiking, I will call on some of my teammates to come out and help me. And like I said, I have some good connections at the University of Memphis. And so pulling along grad students or faculty who might be interested in the area, that's always good to have another pair of hands and another set of eyes out in the field with you for safety, but also to make other observations of what you're out there studying. So
Mhm.
it's helpful to have someone else out in the field, though most of my mapping I tend to do alone. I
Mhm.
work from home. I do travel to Nashville every now and then for meetings and maybe to just touch base with the folks that are there. But yeah, mostly alone, but I try to collaborate and bring folks with me as much as I can, because it's much more fun to be out in the field with someone else than
Mhm.
to be out there by yourself.
Awesome. And I know that you mentioned some grad students come with you along with some professors. How do you recruit those grad students? Do you get recommendations? Are they people that you kind of already have relationships with? Can you speak to more how you kind of build those relationships?
Yeah, so I have faculty members at the University of Memphis who have worked on other research projects. And I typically will reach out to them and say, hey, do you have a student who needs experience? Do you have someone who is interested in this particular area? Or even someone who just wants to get out of the office and go out in the field for a minute, because I know everybody enjoys to step away from the computer, especially in the geosciences. And so I just kind of keep an eye on who's interested. And every now and then I will reach back out and see if there are any other grad students, because I like to spread the love a little bit, make sure that everybody gets a chance to come out into the field. Because sometimes there's a new student that you're just not aware of, and they're super interested in this particular thing, and you can bring them along and give them some additional experience that they can take with them into their career.
Great, thanks. And I think Lindsay will transition to you to talk about some more of the specific projects, Val, that you've discussed already.
Sure.
Yeah, so you talked about a few projects, but for the one looking at rock fractures, can you talk more about who might use this data and how that data might be used?
Yes. So this data is important for anyone who might be interested in groundwater and how it travels, or surface water and how it travels. And so this kind of gave us an idea of this particular region and whether those stream lineaments kind of mimicked those rock fractures. And in particular, this might be of interest to a company who might be trying to get rid of their wastewater. So if they're trying to drill to a certain depth and dump their water there, they need to be aware of how that interacts with the groundwater. Or you might have a surface mining company who needs to know how their surface runoff is going to be entering into the environment so that they can kind of keep track of where their wastewater is going and how it might travel. So those are just a couple of the ways that we can use that data. But there are also additional studies that can be done. So for instance, other researchers who might want to reference this work when they're dealing with their particular lineament study. So there are a lot of other studies that have looked at where they take satellite imagery and they're extracting lineament data, and they can kind of compare the work that we did with the work that they are doing. And just kind of reference it. Even if it doesn't match up in methodology, they can at least say, hey, it didn't necessarily match up in methodology. They can say as much. So it works with private companies as well as researchers. Anybody can use this data.
That's great that so many people can use it. How do they access it? Is it publicly available, or is that something they would have to request from you?
The actual data they would have to request from us, we haven't published that study yet. We are working with some other researchers to do a collaboration publication where we're doing like a regional study of kind of like the Appalachian, Ouachita, like this region in between. And so we're adding this into that as like I guess you would say it's like just a regional view of the geology. And so once this is published, folks can see what we've done with the data. And then if they want our particular spreadsheets of, because we collected 1,800 measurements. So if they want all of that, if they're interested in that, then they can get that from us. But it won't necessarily all be, a massive spreadsheet in our paper. It's going to be represented in maps.
Right, right. And so if one of these companies who uses the data wanted to say, do this themselves, like how easy is it to see these fractures? Like if they don't have a lot of experience, would that be easy to see, or is that something you really need to be trained on?
You can definitely pick out fractures in the field as a person who isn't necessarily used to studying fractures. However, it's difficult to see which ones are the important ones unless you have someone out there looking with you. So you can look at a rock face. All of our study was done, all of our field work rather, was done on outcrops. So we were driving roads. We would kind of look off, the passenger would look off of the road into the forest and see if they could spot any rock outcrops. And then we would go to that outcrop and we would look for these systematic fractures. And what I mean by systematic, meaning they all kind of point in the same general direction. And we would measure them. We would make sure that we have as much data as we could possibly get from that formation. What type of rock is it? What are the length of these fractures? What's the direction of the outcrop facing? So if you're out and you're looking at a fracture, that may not be the only fracture set that is there. You have to keep in mind that sometimes these walls of rock, that may be the face of a fracture. So you have to make sure that you're keeping in mind your own biases when you're looking at this rock fracture. So the direction you're looking at it. And if you're interested in going and finding fractures, one thing that I would suggest is walk along the rock face and look at it from all different directions, because you may miss something if you just look at it from one direction straight on. So kind of look at it from the side, from the left, from the right, and you may see some more systematic fractures that you didn't see before just based off of your biases of your looking direction. So we've gathered so much information from an outcrop face that would help us keep in mind, like, hey, our looking direction is this way. That doesn't mean that this other set of systematic fractures isn't there. It just means we maybe couldn't see it because of our looking direction.
Ooh, it makes me want to go out and try.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. That was probably one of the more fun projects that I was on, because a lot of dealing with West Tennessee, you're dealing with sediment and a lot of stuff that you can't see. You have to use this borehole data. But when we were working with these rock fractures, it was so much fun to go out and look for fossils and see these massive rock faces and look for faults and folds and things like that. It was definitely a lot of fun. I would suggest anyone who's interested in geology to just go look at some rock cuts. One more thing I wanted to mention about rock fractures is if you're looking, let's say you're driving down the road and you see a massive wall of rocks, pay attention to these blast zones. So when they're cutting the roads for these highways, you may see a ton of fractures in one area and they're all radiating out of this central point. That's a blast zone. Don't be fooled. That is somebody taking a stick of dynamite and blowing a hole in a rock. It's not, it has nothing to do with geologic processes, and that's not what we were looking for. We were looking for these natural features, not a stick of dynamite.
Good tip.
Mhm.
So then also you mentioned some stereo nets and you mentioned how easy they were to study. And I really wish I was on the same page with you with that and knowing exactly how to read that. So we were hoping you could share some more information on how to read those stereo nets with us.
Yeah, I thought that might be the case. I've been looking at these things for a couple of years, so they're easy for me and maybe not so easy for everyone else. If it's okay with you, I'll bring up some images and kind of walk you guys through these stereo nets and how to read them.
Yeah, we would love that.
So this is a typical outcrop that we would be looking at. And I have highlighted here these rock fractures. So we have this orange shade, which is one set of systematic fractures, and you can see they occur in multiple different places. That's what we're looking for, systematic fractures. And then we have these yellow guys here, and these are really long fractures. These are at least a few meters in length. And so if you kind of imagine looking at these from above, so if you're looking down on them like you're looking at a map, and we can plot this data. So here's the direction of this yellow rock face, and this is kind of pointing in the same direction. So we have a stereo net, which goes from north. So if you're looking down at this fracture, we have north, and we have our degrees from north all the way to 359. And so this tells us that this rock fracture trends northwest to southeast. So that gives us an idea of what direction this rock face or this fracture face is pointing. Same with this guy, we can plot him here. And then we can take these orange guys and we can plot them in a similar manner. And so this is not only telling us the direction that our fracture is pointing, but it's also telling us what the dip of that fracture is, meaning what is the slope. So most of these are about 90 degrees. So if this line were kind of snug to the edge of the stereo net, that would mean we would have a smaller dip. So think like maybe, 10 degrees dip, we would probably be in this region here. But most of these fractures were about 90 degrees, so this line appears to be straight. And so we can plot all of these guys like this with these straight lines, but we can also plot their poles, which just means it's a dot that is 90 degrees from this plane. So if you imagine this as a straight plane, this dot would be 90 degrees from that plane. And the reason why we want to plot these dots is because we're dealing with 1,800 measurements. So if we were to plot this as all straight lines across the stereo net, it would get really messy and really difficult to read. So we like to plot poles. And so you can see these clusters of poles. And on this particular stereo net, we have this color ramp, which shows kind of like a heat map. It shows you where the densest population of your poles is going to be. So red being the most dense and blue being the least dense. And if you don't have any colors at all, that means you probably don't have any poles there. And so this is an overview of our study area. We have our zones that we picked out, and they're all color coded. And we plotted these, but this is all of our data together. And so we've plotted our poles, we have our heat map, and we can kind of see what the regional trend is before we separate it into zones. And so this is just a very, kind of simple figure when we're dealing with the stereo nets and their zones. So we have this gray zone is represented by this stereo net. So you can see that the majority of our poles are located in this area, meaning this is probably the most predominant fracture system, with this being the secondary fracture system. And here we have our heat map of our poles here. So that means that this is our most primary set of fractures, because remember, those poles are showing us 90 degrees from our fracture plane. And so we can look at this map and kind of see how those fractures change across our study area and what their predominant direction might be. And so in all of our zones, we have a set of 2 different systematic fractures. We have our northwest southeast set of fractures, and we have our northeast southwest set of fractures. But you can see that across our study area, they change and which one is more dominant. And so this can kind of give us an idea of where like a spatial trend might be in the data.
Great, thank you so much. That was quite a bit easier than I thought it was going to be.
Yes, yeah. Once you kind of get a feel for it, it's easier to see what I was talking about. So when you've looked at these for a couple of years, you're gonna be an expert, and you'll be able to pick out you'll be able to read a stereo net and kind of understand what that's telling you.
Great, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
And so with the stereo nets, did you learn that programming or that analysis method in your schooling, or did you get trained within your career? Can you give more background about how you learned that skill?
Yeah, so structural geology is where I first learned about stereo nets, but we did more of a manual method. So we would have a clear sheet of paper, we would have some tracing paper, and we would set it on top of a wolf net, which is a type of stereo net, and you kind of move it around and you draw these things out by hand. But there are software packages that allow you to do this much easier. You just type in your data and it plots the stereo net for you. But it's very important to learn these things by hand, because then you understand more of what you're looking at. And I'm a very visual person. I like to learn by doing as well. So whenever I was making these stereo nets, it gave me a good foundation that I didn't know I needed in the future because I hadn't started this project yet. But once I started, I was like, I know stereo nets and I know how to read them, and I can use this software and I know what it's telling me. So there are ways to do it the easy way, but I definitely suggest working by hand, figuring out these things before you go into any kind of programming or software situation, because you want to know what's going on under the hood before you start trying to plot your data without having a direction or knowing what you're doing.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And
Mhm.
you also mentioned in your talk or your previous presentation about the 3D model and how you use different languages. And obviously you've gotten more experience in different programs for the stereo nets. Can you talk about what other coding capabilities you have and where you learned those different skills as well?
Sure. So throughout my undergrad, that's where I first was introduced to coding. And it's very intimidating at the beginning. It almost looks like a completely different language that wasn't made on planet Earth. You're just kind of looking at this kind of googly-eyed and confused. But over time, once you get those good basics down, you can take them into so many different fields. But I chose geology, so that's how I use this coding to make my life a bit simpler and a little more streamlined. But in undergrad, I focused on Python coding. So in my advanced GIS course, one of the professors there, who had taken all of my GIS courses from up until that point, and he actually became a part of my master's committee, he was teaching me how to use these coding languages. And then I moved on to biogeography, which is a course where we used R and R Studio. That's R is a coding language, and it's used more so by researchers. And so R is what I took with me into my thesis, and that's how I used R coding when I was making my maps. And so I learned primarily through my mentor, Dr. Kwan at the University of Memphis. And he kind of showed me the ropes with coding, but then I worked directly with him to get the methodology for my thesis. So it wasn't necessarily a part of my coursework, but there was a lot of collaboration with Dr. Kwan to make sure that I was doing all of this correctly. A lot of YouTube videos as well. So I definitely used YouTube more than I would like to admit to, but it's a great resource to use. There are people who are working on so many different projects, and it may not be exactly what you're working on, but you can use that as a resource to kind of further your project if that's what you're interested in.
Yeah, I remember when I was learning Python and our YouTube was like on YouTube all the time.
Yes.
Great resource to use, especially for coding. That's great.
Definitely.
Can you speak a little bit more about the model that you shared? So you've given us some background about how you learned the different coding languages to create the model. But speaking of the interactive model that you showed, how could someone use that? Or what are the most common uses to be able to use that model? Can we take cross sections? Can you speak more about it?
So for my work particularly, I made a ton of cross sections, and that's what I have in my thesis. I have 30 or so cross sections where I'm showing every single geologic feature and what it looks like in the subsurface. But what we're really interested in doing with this particular 3D model is finding a journal where we can put this online so that people can have an interactive model to look at as they're reading the paper. And that would be wonderful for this type of publication, especially for online journals. I feel like they're such a great resource when you're dealing with modeling and things that need to be manipulated spatially to really get the full story. But if we can't find a good journal that's a good fit for that, I have tons of cross sections to display. So anything that you could think of, I've already displayed it, but I know it's a lot more fun to kind of dig into those 3D models yourself.
So you mentioned in your talk that you work with other states on naming formations, or that there's kind of a disconnect in the naming of those formations to date. Is this a national priority, or is this a goal that's specific for Tennessee?
I'm not exactly sure if it's a national priority, though I suspect it might be because they're working on, they being the USGS, they're working on a national 3D model. So one of the only ways that you can accomplish something like that is if you have consistent naming across state lines. This particular project is focused on the Southeast, and so I'm working with people from Texas all the way to Alabama and up into Arkansas. So, it's more of a regional scale, but I imagine they're probably working on this nationally.
So it's not just states that necessarily border Tennessee that you're working with.
Correct. Yes. These formations that are in West Tennessee, you can see them all across the Southeast, all the way up into New Jersey. So these formations kind of hit that swath of land along the South, as well as down into Texas. So we're working with these researchers to see how they are alike, how they're different, and making sure that we are consistent in our naming.
Great. Well, another thing that you mentioned is that some natural hazards like earthquakes that occur in Tennessee that I'm sure also affect those surrounding states near you. And so even though it's not along a plate boundary, Tennessee, you mentioned it being an anomaly. Is there an explanation for why there are so many earthquakes there?
Yes. So this area is what was in what's called an alocogen. So it was a failed rift zone. And if you think of, what's happening in East Africa, where the plate is kind of splitting apart, that's what was starting to happen here. And then over time, these faults got reactivated. So if you think of a hotspot like the Hawaiian Islands, a hotspot passed through this area and reactivated this rift zone. And so that's kind of what we're seeing here. It's not along a plate boundary. It could have been if this rift zone was continuing, but it failed. But these faults, if they are there, they have the potential to be reactivated. And that's what we're seeing here is a reactivation of these ancient faults. and they don't usually produce really large magnitude earthquakes, but what we're dealing with is the potential for that to happen because it has happened historically.
Right. And the geologic maps that you make, do you think they have the potential to help people in, like, saying, making cities that are more resilient to larger earthquakes like that?
Definitely. So when we make a quadrangle, we do map the faults that are there. But that's not the only information that we add pertaining to earthquake hazards. So what a big hazard that we see here in the Mississippi River Valley is liquefaction. So if you're in the floodplain, that has the potential to liquefy, meaning you're going to have a lot of movement of that sand and water is going to reach the surface, and it's going to result in large scale destruction of structures and roads and bridges. And so not only liquefaction, we have areas that are more prone to landslides. And so we map the floodplains, we map landslides, and it just kind of gives you an idea of what potential earthquake hazard you might be seeing. It might not necessarily be because of a nearby fault. It might just be that you're in an area that's prone to landslides and liquefaction.
Great. So it's a good thing all of these are being updated then.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. With only a couple minutes left, we want to make sure we save some time for the live Q&A. I just have a couple more questions, probably more broadly about your experiences so far. Do you want to share with us what some of your favorite parts or most memorable experiences of the job so far?
Yeah, I'm very green in this position, but so far I've really enjoyed incorporating the University of Memphis in my projects because that's where my home is, and it's where I learned all of my skills. And I'm really enjoying the collaborations with the faculty. We're working really closely with CSER, or the Center for Applied Earth Science and Engineering Research, CERI, which is the Center for Earthquake Research and Information. And so working with these institutions, as well as the other faculty who might be interested in some of my projects, it's been really rewarding to kind of give back a little bit and offer my labor and my expertise to future geologists. So that's probably my favorite part about all of this, is just kind of I didn't really need to learn anything about West Tennessee to kind of be accepted into the position and ready to rock, though I'm still learning. There's a ton of stuff that I don't know yet, but I was able to kind of fit the bill for this position, and I'm taking off and running with it and making sure that I'm bringing folks along with me.
That's awesome. And speaking of taking off and running, what are some of your professional goals for the future?
Yes. So the TDEC, or the Tennessee Division of Environment and Conservation, who is kind of the um, the parent of the Tennessee Geologic Survey, they offer one class a semester. They'll pay for one class a semester for a professional degree. So I intend to go back and get my PhD. Though I've taken this year to kind of get fitted into the position and make sure that I know what my workload is and what all of my responsibilities are. But in the next couple of years, I'll be going back to get my PhD. There are a few folks who are gearing up for retirement, and so, upward mobility into a higher position, and even maybe looking forward to being a state geologist. So yeah, I do have some long-term plans. I've got some short-term plans, and all of them deal with geology.
Specifically, probably geology in Tennessee, it sounds
Yes.
like.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Valarie, thank you so much for talking with Lindsay and me and sharing your work today. We're going to probably wrap up now. So there's, again, time for questions from the audience, and we will kick it over to us live. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're now going to move into our discussion portion where Valarie can answer some questions that we see are posted in the chat. As a reminder, if you still have questions, you can continue to keep posting them there in the chat. And just to get things started, I want to ask a little bit about, a few times during your presentation, you mentioned boreholes and how they're taken to contribute to geologic mapping. Is that a common practice when making geologic maps?
It's not usually that common, but in West Tennessee, a lot of what we're interested in is buried. Like in Memphis, there are 3,000 feet of sediment before you reach the Paleozoic, which is your first crystal and rock that you're going to encounter. And a lot of what we're interested in are aquifers and aquicludes. I saw there was a question about aquicludes in the chat. But to get information about those units, we need to drill. So for instance, our drilling takes us down about 300 feet. And so that's going to give us information about the near surface geology that's still going to be a bit buried. We have a lot of what's called loess, which is essentially wind-blown silt that was deposited during the Pleistocene. And so to get below that loess, you're going to have to do some kind of digging or look for stream cuts. And when we're talking about aquicludes, that just means like a protective layer for the aquifer. So this is typically a clay layer. Clay is very good at slowing down water, and it can't penetrate through that clay layer, and it'll move across the top of it. And relating to a watershed, I would say that it's not related to a watershed, although if the aquiclude is not there, the water from the surface, which is what we're thinking about a watershed, it can go into the aquifer. So when we're doing these drilling projects, we're looking for where the aquiclude is and where it isn't, because if it's not there, we need to be cognizant of our surface water and if there's anything nearby that can pollute our aquifer. Other geologists in the state, this is actually kind of a newer project, the drilling project. They don't deal with drilling. They do use historically drilled wells and cores, and they use that data in their mapping. But typically when they are going out and doing field work, they're looking for outcrops, and they're looking and collecting strike and dip data and information on faults and things like that. But for me to do my job, since everything's covered in loess, I have to get a little bit dirty and dig down a little bit further than just looking at surface outcrops, because there aren't a whole lot out here.
I mean, that's why you became a geologist or a geoscientist, right? So you
Oh,
could dig
yes.
through the dirt. Absolutely.
Yeah, I have what's called a geologist manicure. I don't know if you can tell, but just dirty fingernails, essentially.
Is there any concern when making those boreholes? Is that considered an environmentally friendly practice?
It seems a bit scary, but it's really not. The worst that we introduce to a borehole is water. So when they're drilling, we're essentially just taking the sediment out, looking at it, collecting our samples, and then backfilling the hole. Particularly in West Tennessee, that hole will begin to close back up in like onto itself, which it's only a 6-inch hole. So it doesn't have very far to move, but the sediment is so soft that it essentially fills back in that hole. And we try to pick places where we're either in the uplands, so we're at higher altitude or elevations, or we are out of a watershed, so that we're not introducing anything into the environment inadvertently, because that's the last thing we want to do. We're studying the aquifer, and we're not trying to introduce anything harmful to it. So
Great, thanks, Val. Another question in the chat was about the seismic animation, which I believe you answered with a link as well. But did you want to talk about the animation at all, or discuss that?
Just that it's really cool, and I really love that animation, and it gives you a visual representation of how massive the devastation would be if we had a large scale a large magnitude earthquake like we had in 1811, 1812. There was one in 1895 in Missouri, but these earthquakes, though they're not frequent, it's a terrifying prospect to think of how much destruction would happen. So that's what I really like about that particular animation, is that it gives you an idea of, you have that regional view, and you can see how these waves will propagate through this sediment.
Great. We had another question in the chat about your research on structural, so someone's doing research on structural side, sorry. They were wondering what the past data looks like, and if you're working solely in uncharted territory.
It is not uncharted. Like I said, the New Madrid seismic zone brings in a lot of interest around the world. So we have researchers that are continually working on updating information. The more information that we gather, the more information we have on the New Madrid seismic zone. And so we do have a wealth of data, though, we're continuously adding to it. The focus, however, in West Tennessee, is particularly with the University of Memphis, if we're talking about structural geology, has been more towards the New Madrid seismic zone, which, if you remember back to those maps, kind of only takes up the westernmost sliver of West Tennessee. And so the rest of West Tennessee has been a bit neglected. There are some interest with the Cretaceous units and some of the heavy minerals and rare earth elements that might be in those deposits. But when we're talking about the New Madrid seismic zone, it is not uncharted. There has been a lot of interest in there, and particularly with some of the universities in the region. A lot of my mentors worked a lot of their research has been done on the New Madrid seismic zone. So if you're looking for some really good papers on the New Madrid seismic zone, go to Google Scholar and just type it in and you will get a ton of papers, more than you could ever digest. So
That's fantastic. There was another kind of follow-up question, which you started to touch on, but it said, how much work remains for you to understand the kinematics of the New Madrid seismic zone?
That would be
well understood.
That I can't really speak to that. I've been focused more on locating faults and things of that nature, but or looking for surface closer to the surface movement of these faults, which would give us an idea of how long these things have been activated. So I can't really speak to that, but that's a good thing to look into if kinematics are what you're interested in.
Great. And then Val, the next question in the chat was more about your job and basically asking how frequently you travel. Do you travel pretty frequently, or do you have a typical 40-hour work week? So can you talk to kind of what a typical week looks like for you?
Sure. So it depends on the season. In the summer, my 40-hour work week, which we usually go around 37 and a half to 40. So in the summertime, it's really hot and way too humid to go out and do field work. So I'm typically inside working on my map. I'm drawing polygons. I'm getting my data prepped to make this map. If it's the wintertime, so say November through April, that's when I'm out in the field and doing data collection. And actually, we're getting ready to do this drilling project, which will be done at the end of October, early November. So it's kind of variable. I never get bored doing one thing, because as soon as I get bored doing that, I'm doing a different type of work, just as the seasons change. And as far as traveling, I would say during the field season, I might travel 1 to 2 days every couple of weeks during the latter part of the season. But early on, I'm out like maybe 4 days a week, just to get that initial like recon work, things of that nature. But going to Nashville, so if I have meetings in Nashville, that only happens like, I would say maybe once every couple of months. So I'm not doing a ton of long distance traveling. Any traveling that I'm talking about it's local. I'm going to my field sites. So whatever quadrangle I'm working on or whatever project that I'm dealing with.
All right, and our last question from the chat, what direction do you think Geologic Map is going? Is it still as relevant as ever?
I think so. The direction, I think it's moving more towards more of an incorporation of technology. Previous geologists have done, and still a lot of folks who are working in geology now use a lot of manual techniques, which are great and cannot be discounted. And I actually use a lot of those techniques myself. However, with this ever increasing amount of just great technology that can help you out in the field, such as drones, satellite imagery, all of these different things that can help us make our lives easier. We're starting to incorporate that more and more. And I think that's a great thing. However, you've just got to be careful of what data you're collecting and the observations that you're making, because it's easy to go out and take a picture with a drone, but making sure that you're using that data properly is the important part.
So there's kind of a follow-up that if you think the process could ever be automated.
I don't think so. Even if we were to automate parts of it, there still needs to be ground truthing. And the only way to do that currently is to have a geologist go out and ground truth this stuff. So we can look at a map that's been automated completely from satellite imagery, but you need to have boots on the ground to make sure that that is what the observation is on the field, because there could be, you know, I hate to, there are ways to manipulate data once you get it off of the whatever website, or if you're using satellite data, it can be manipulated. So you just have to make sure that you're getting boots on the ground to see if that's truly what's there.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And then one more super quick question. This will be easy to answer. Do you have plans to attend the GSA conference next week in Pittsburgh?
No, unfortunately, there are too many things that I have to do here in West Tennessee. Like I said, we're gearing up for that drilling project. I really wish I could be there. That would have been really fun to attend. I was looking forward to it, but yeah, there's too much stuff going on in Tennessee that I'm excited about, but just can't go to Pittsburgh.
Maybe the next one, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's about all we have time for. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to email us here at webinars@americangeosciences.org, and we can forward your questions along to Valarie. Within the next week, we'll be posting the recording of today's webinar both on AGI's YouTube channel and webpage, and we'll notify all attendees once that recording is available. Thank you again, Valarie, for sharing your time, your expertise, and your insight with us today. It seems like a lot of people from comments in the chat have really enjoyed your talk, and we really enjoyed talking with you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. It was a lot of fun.
Great. And next up in our Early Career Professionals and Mapping webinar series is Caleb Wagner, a PhD student at the Czech Academy of Sciences and Charles University, who will be discussing geologic mapping in glaciated terrains and his work with the Minnesota Geological Survey on November 2nd. You can view more details about the talk and register using the link in the chat. And if you are an early career professional in mapping or know someone who is, please encourage them to apply to be a speaker in this ongoing series. Applications will open in January for the next round of speakers. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.